The sun was sinking low over the plains, its last light bleeding across the horizon in streaks of crimson and gold. Dust swirled in lazy spirals behind Caleb Hartley's horse, the animal's hooves muffled by dry earth. Caleb rode with the kind of silence that came from habit, his hat pulled low, the brim shadowing eyes that had seen too much loss to expect much more from the world. The trail back toward Silver Creek was long and lonesome, framed by stands of cottonwood and patches of wild sage that caught the evening wind. Caleb liked it that way. Loneliness didn't demand anything from him, and silence never broke promises. After years of drifting from one ranch job to another, he had learned to keep his distance from people and the ties that bound them. Ties broke, people left. He had buried a brother to war and a father to despair, and he had no desire to bury anything more. Yet fate has a way of ambushing even the wariest of men. It began with a sound, faint at first, like the whimper of an animal caught in a snare. Caleb slowed his horse, tipping his head. The noise came again, sharper now, edged with human desperation. His hand brushed the revolver at his hip as instinct tightened his muscles. He nudged his horse off the trail and into the copse of trees. That was when he saw her. At first he thought it was some ghostly vision, a woman in white, her gown torn and muddied, her long hair tangled in knots. But then his gaze caught the chain glinting in the dim light, iron links snaking from her wrist to the trunk of a weathered oak. She was no spirit. She was flesh and blood, shackled like a criminal. Her head jerked up at the sound of his horse's approach. Wide, tear-brimmed eyes met his, eyes that held both terror and fragile hope. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please don't leave me here." Caleb swung down from his horse slowly, every movement deliberate, as though afraid she might vanish like smoke. He studied the raw bruises on her wrists, the way her chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. Whoever had done this hadn't cared if she lived or died. "Who chained you?" he asked, his voice gravelly from disuse. Her gaze darted away, fixing on the ground. He said, "I shamed him, that I'd learn obedience one way or another." Her words faltered, cut through with the weight of something unspeakable. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty in many forms, but the sight of a woman abandoned like an animal stoked a rage he thought long buried. He crouched near the chain, testing its strength. "Got name?" After a beat of silence, she whispered, "Evelyn. Evelyn Grant." The name stirred a flicker of recognition. He'd heard whispers in town, about a bride brought in from the east to marry a wealthy rancher, about a wedding that had ended in scandal. The details had been murky, but the hushed tones of the townsfolk had carried enough venom for him to know this young woman had become the center of ridicule and gossip. Caleb retrieved a hunting knife from his belt and began working at the lock. "Hold still." She shrank back at first, mistrust sharpening her features. But when the metal clattered free and her wrist fell loose, her eyes flooded with tears. She clutched the freed hand against her chest as though unsure it belonged to her. "You're safe now," he said, though the words tasted hollow. He knew safety was a fragile thing in a town ruled by men of power and reputation. Evelyn's gaze searched his face, as if trying to measure the truth of him. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Caleb sheathed the knife with a quiet click. "Don't need to. A person chained to a tree doesn't deserve to be left there. That's enough." He guided her gently to his horse. She stumbled, weakened by hours, maybe longer, of captivity. When he lifted her onto the saddle, her fingers clutched at the reins as though she feared being abandoned again. Caleb swung up behind her, the warmth of her trembling frame pressed against him. The ride back toward town was slower now, her weight light, yet heavy, with unspoken burdens. Evelyn said little, only that she had no family nearby and no place to go. Her words were clipped, guarded, as though she carried secrets too dangerous to release. Caleb's mind churned. The image of her chained and broken would not leave him. Whoever had done this, and he could guess well enough who, had no right to walk unchallenged. But he also knew that stepping into another's feud meant inviting a storm he might not weather. As the lantern lights of Silver Creek flickered in the distance, Evelyn stiffened. "They'll talk," she murmured. "They'll twist everything. You don't know what they'll do to you, For helping me." Caleb almost answered that he didn't care, but that wasn't the truth. He cared plenty. He cared about keeping his head low, about surviving one day at a time without entanglements. But he also couldn't ride past suffering and pretend it wasn't his concern. By the time they entered the edge of town, whispers were already stirring. Figures peered from doorways, brows furrowed in suspicion. A bride in tattered white, riding with a drifter? It was fodder for gossip that would spread faster than wildfire. Caleb dismounted, steadying Evelyn as she slid from the horse. He felt every eye upon them, every silent judgment. A man leaning against the saloon rail spat in the dirt and muttered, "Guess Boyd's bride found herself another fool." Evelyn flinched, shrinking closer to Caleb's side. He said nothing, only adjusted his hat brim lower and led her toward the sheriff's office. The night air was heavy with tension. Somewhere deep inside, Caleb knew this wasn't just about a woman abandoned by her groom. It was about something darker, something that would test the limits of his patience, his strength, and his willingness to stand for someone else's fight. As they stopped before the sheriff's door, Evelyn gripped his arm, her voice a broken whisper. "Please, don't let him take me back." Caleb met her gaze, and in that instant, he made his choice. Silver Creek had always been a town where news traveled faster than the wind. A broken fence on one ranch, a calf lost in the river, a saloon brawl ending with teeth scattered across the floor. Before sundown, every mouth from the mercantile to the church pew carried the story. But tonight's whispers carried something heavier. The forsaken bride returned with a stranger at her side. By morning, Caleb Hartley's name was back on lips that had all but forgotten him. Drifter's got himself tangled with Boyd's castoff. He's either a fool or looking for trouble. Didn't know Caleb had the stomach to play hero. Caleb ignored it as best he could. He had led Evelyn to the sheriff's office the night before, but Sheriff Tomlinson had only shrugged, his guts spilling over his belt, eyes sharp with discomfort. "Ain't my place to meddle in Boyd Grant's affairs," he'd muttered. "You do best not to either, Hartley. Boyd's money lines half this town's pockets." Caleb had seen the way Evelyn's shoulders sank at those words, as though she had expected no better. He had led her instead to the livery, where the stable boy sister lent a blanket and a corner of hayloft to sleep in. It was no home, but it was shelter. Now, as dawn poured golden light across the street, Caleb walked beside Evelyn toward the mercantile. Her dress, once white, now gray with dirt, hung heavy against her frame. She moved stiffly, head bowed, as though each step was a march through shame. People noticed. Mrs. Tully, who ran the bakery, paused in kneading dough just long enough to sneer through the window. A group of ranch hands, leaning against a post, traded smirks and muttered remarks not meant for Evelyn's ears, though she heard every one. A mother tugged her child closer, whispering fiercely before crossing the street. Evelyn's face burned crimson, and she turned her head toward Caleb. "They think I'm filth. They believe his lies." Caleb's jaw flexed. Let him think what they want. Truth's still truth. She stopped in the street, the stubborn fire of someone pushed too far flashing in her eyes. "Truth don't matter here. Boyd owns the truth. He can say I'm mad, or that I betrayed him, and they'll all nod their heads. You don't know what kind of man he is." Caleb met her gaze evenly. "Then you'd better tell me." But she only shook her head and stepped into the mercantile, leaving him with questions gnawing at his gut. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of grain and leather. Mr. Cartwright, the shopkeeper, straightened uneasily when he saw Evelyn. His smile, brittle as glass, stretched toward Caleb. "Hartley, heard you're back in town. Didn't expect you with company." Evelyn's hands twisted together, knuckles white. Caleb spoke evenly. "She needs supplies. Clothes. Food." Cartwright hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Boyd was in here not an hour ago. He's riled, Hartley. Claims that woman ran from him on her wedding night. Says she's touched in the head. Says you're meddling in matters better left alone." Evelyn flinched at the words, her body rigid. Caleb's expression darkened. He laid a coin on the counter with deliberate force. "Just ring it up." Cartwright obeyed, though his hands trembled. The room seemed to close in, the silence louder than any accusation. Every shopper pretended to study shelves, but their ears strained for every word. When Caleb and Evelyn stepped back into the street, the whispers followed like shadows. They walked toward the churchyard, where the tall spire cut into the sky like a blade. Evelyn's voice trembled. He'll never stop. Boyd doesn't forgive humiliation. And me chained out there. That was his forgiveness. Caleb turned sharply to her. You mean he? Her lips pressed together, refusing the words. She lifted her chin, but her eyes shone with unshed tears. The unspoken hung heavy between them. Caleb had no love for Boyd Grant, but hearing the extent of his cruelty stoked a heat that burned deep. Still, he knew rage alone couldn't protect her. Silver Creek was Boyd's kingdom, and Caleb had just placed himself squarely in the path of its tyrant. They paused at the well in the square. Children ran past, chasing a ragged ball, their laughter at odds with the tension strung tight through town. Evelyn sank onto the stone rim, exhaustion plain in the slump of her shoulders. You should walk away, she whispered. If you stay near me, he'll ruin you too. Caleb crouched beside her, searching her face. If I was going to walk away, I'd have left you chained to that tree. The simple truth of it seemed to break something in her. For the first time, a flicker of trust softened her features. But the moment shattered with the heavy clop of boots on wood. Boyd Grant himself stood at the edge of the square, flanked by two of his hired men. He was broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with the polished look of money and authority. His eyes, however, were sharp with venom as they fixed on Evelyn. There you are, Boyd said smoothly, his voice carrying across the square. Thought you might have learned your place by now. But I see you found yourself a savior. Evelyn froze, her hands gripping the edge of the well until her knuckles blanched. Caleb rose to his full height, placing himself between her and Boyd. She's not your property. A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Boyd's smile widened, but it was cold as steel. Careful, Hartley. You're trespassing on more than land. You think you can challenge me. You'll find this town doesn't side with drifters. Caleb said nothing, his silence its own defiance. Boyd took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough for only them to hear. You want her. Then bear her sins. Every lie she spun, every disgrace she brought me. It'll all stick to you. I'll see to it. He turned, his boots striking sharp against the boards, leaving behind a silence that rang louder than thunder. Evelyn sagged against the well, her eyes closing. You shouldn't have spoken. He won't stop now. Caleb stared after Boyd, the tension coiling tight in his chest. He wasn't a man who sought fights, but some battles came looking for you, whether you were ready or not. As the townsfolk drifted back to their business, their whispers carried on the wind, weaving judgment, speculation, and fear into every syllable. Caleb knew only one thing. Whatever storm Boyd meant to bring, he wouldn't, let Evelyn face it alone. The night air in Silver Creek was thin and sharp, carrying with it the faint scent of sagebrush and smoke. Caleb Hartley leaned against the post of the livery, his hat low against the stars. He could hear Evelyn shifting in the hayloft above, her breathing uneven as though even sleep offered her no rest. He knew that kind of restlessness. He carried it himself, the kind that came from scars beneath the skin, where memory cut deeper than any blade. At last, the boards creaked softly. Evelyn climbed down, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The lantern's glow caught her face, pale and drawn, shadows under her eyes. You can't sleep either, she murmured. Caleb straightened, nodding toward a bench outside. Reckon the night's easier when it's faced in company. She hesitated, then sat beside him, the blanket trailing against the dirt. For a while, silence stretched between them, broken only by the lonely howl of a coyote somewhere across the plains. Finally, Evelyn spoke. You're wondering why he did it. Why Boyd would chain a woman he claimed to marry. Caleb didn't answer, but his steady gaze told her she was right. Her hands tightened on the blanket. He said I was his redemption, that marrying me would make the town forget his cruelty, his debts. But when I couldn't give him what he wanted, he said I was cursed. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself on. I was promised before, to another man, a kind man, but he died before the vows. Folks said I carried misfortune. Boyd used that. Said I was bad luck, a stain on his name. When I tried to run, that's when he chained me. The words fell heavy, like stones dropped in a well. Caleb's jaw worked, the muscle tight as he stared at the ground. He had known men like Boyd, men who wielded power not with strength, but with cruelty, who broke others to prove themselves whole. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward him, shining in the dim light. You must think I'm weak, that I let him. No, Caleb's voice was low but firm, cutting through her shame. What I think is that you survived, and that takes more grit than most men I've known. For the first time, something fragile flickered across her face. Not quite hope, but the faint echo of it. They sat in quiet for a time, until the creak of boots on the street broke the stillness. A pair of men passed, ranch hands from Boyd spread, their laughter sharp as glass. See her there, one muttered, not caring if she heard. Boyd's wild dog. Surprised Hartley hasn't put her down yet. Evelyn flinched, shoulders curling inward. Caleb rose slowly, his shadow stretching long across the street. His voice was calm, but steel threaded through it. Best keep walking. The men glanced at his stance, at the weight in his eyes, and thought better of their mockery. They moved on, though their laughter lingered like a stench. Evelyn's breath trembled. This town will never forget what he made of me. Caleb sat again, but closer now. Then let him talk. You ain't chains, Evelyn. You're more than the lies he hung on you. Her lips parted as though to reply, but no words came. Instead, tears welled, slipping silently down her cheeks. She turned away quickly, ashamed of them, but Caleb didn't look at her with pity, only with a steady patience that asked nothing, demanded nothing. The lantern light flickered, casting shifting shadows on the livery wall. Evelyn wiped at her face, gathering herself. Why help me, Caleb? You don't owe me anything. He stared out at the night, his voice low. Maybe because I know what it feels like to be marked by a past you didn't choose. She glanced at him sharply, but he didn't elaborate. He only tipped his hat lower, as though closing that door. But in that moment, a thread bound them, unspoken but real. The days that followed thickened with tension. Boyd's men lingered on corners, their eyes sharp whenever Caleb and Evelyn passed. The town's whispers grew crueler, stories twisting into knots. That Evelyn was a madwoman Caleb had taken pity on, that she bewitched him, that Boyd was the real victim. Still, Evelyn walked beside Caleb, straighter now than before, though each step was an act of defiance. At the well, in the mercantile, even outside the church, she felt their stares, but Caleb's quiet presence steadied her. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she stood with him outside the churchyard. The bells tolled faintly, though no service was called. My mother used to tell me, she whispered, that chains are not just iron. They're the lies people believe about you. And the longer you carry them, the heavier they grow. Caleb studied her profile against the fading light. Then maybe it's time to break him. Her breath caught. How? Before he could answer, the sound of hooves thundered down the road. A rider dismounted before them, young, dust-streaked, with Boyd's crest stitched on his coat. His eyes flicked uneasily between them. Boyd sends word, he said, his voice reluctant. Evelyn's to return to him, or Hartley here'll find himself strung up before the week is done. The rider didn't wait for reply. He spurred his horse and vanished into the twilight, leaving dust and silence in his wake. Evelyn's face drained of color. He won't let go. He'll hunt us both. Caleb's eyes narrowed, the lines of his past etched deeper by the fading light. Then he'll learn I don't run from chains, I break him. Evelyn's lips parted, as though to protest, but instead she looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who had wrestled his own shadows long before hers. A man who chose to stand, even when the whole town bent. The night closed in around them, heavy with the weight of what was coming. But for the first time, Evelyn felt the faintest stirrings of freedom, fragile, dangerous, but alive. The morning broke sharp and cold, as if the heavens themselves braced for what was coming. Mist clung to the fields outside Silver Creek, curling low around the fence posts and the sparse cottonwoods. Caleb Hartley stood at the edge of town, head brim low, watching the horizon as though the earth itself would spit out the man he was waiting for. Behind him, Evelyn shifted uneasily. Her hands twisted in the folds of her dress, but her eyes, once dulled by fear, now carried a hard gleam of resolve. She had spent too many years bowed beneath Boyd's shadow. Today she would not bend. "Are you certain?" Caleb asked, his voice a quiet rumble. Evelyn lifted her chin. "I won't hide any longer. He chained me once. If I run now, he wins again." Caleb studied her face, seeing the steel beneath her trembling. He gave a single nod. "Then we stand." It was near midday when the riders came. Boyd Granger rode at their head, tall in the saddle, his black coat flapping like wings. His men fanned out behind him, a dozen hard-eyed ranch hands who lived on the scraps of his cruelty. Dust rose around them, choking, suffocating, as they reined to a stop before the livery. "Well," Boyd drawled, his smile cold, "ain't this a sight? My runaway bride and the broken cowboy who thinks he's her savior." Evelyn's fingers tightened at her sides, but she stood straight. Caleb stepped forward, putting himself between her and Boyd's gaze. "She's not yours to claim," Caleb said evenly. Boyd's laugh was low, dangerous. "Not mine. I made her. Took her when no one else would. Without me, she's nothing but a ghost folks whisper about." At that, Evelyn's voice cut sharp through the air. "No, Boyd. You didn't make me. You unmade me. You fed the town lies until they swallowed them whole." A ripple of murmurs passed through the gathering crowd. Townsfolk had begun to gather along the street, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Some looked away in shame. Others leaned in, hungry for drama. Boyd's smile faltered. "Careful, Evelyn. You speak too boldly for a woman branded." Her breath trembled, but she pressed on. "Tell them the truth, Boyd. Tell them why you chained me. Tell them what you feared they'd discover." The silence that followed was heavy, all eyes fixed on the rancher. Caleb's jaw tightened, sensing the battle was no longer just of fists or guns, but of truth itself. Boyd sneered, spitting in the dirt. "She's barren," he snarled, his voice ringing out. "That's her secret. Can't give a man an heir. What good's a wife who can't carry a legacy? I only chained her to keep her from spreading her curse to another fool." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's face flushed with shame, but she did not look away. Her voice, though trembling, was steady. "And there it is. The weight I carried, turned to shackles by your cruelty. But a woman's worth is not measured by the children she bears. It's measured by the life she lives, the strength she carries, the truth she speaks." Her words hung in the air, trembling like a blade on edge. Caleb looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him shifted. For years, he had carried his own silent wound, a war injury that left him unable to father children himself. He had thought it marked him lesser, unworthy of family or future. Now, hearing Evelyn's defiance, he felt the chains of his own shame begin to crack. Boyd's face darkened, rage boiling over. Enough of this. He swung down from his horse, hand dropping to the pistol at his side. "If the town won't remember her as mine, they'll remember her as dead." In the heartbeat that followed, everything moved fast. Caleb stepped forward, his Colt already drawn, steady as stone. The crowd scattered with shouts, ducking for cover. Boyd's men shifted nervously, but none moved first. They knew Caleb Hartley's reputation with a gun. "Don't do this," Caleb warned, his voice like iron. But Boyd's pride was poison, and pride had blinded him too long. He drew. The crack of gunfire split the air. Birds burst from the cottonwoods, the echo rolling across the valley. Boyd staggered, shock flashing across his face as he clutched his chest. He crumpled to the dirt, his pistol falling useless beside him. Silence fell. Dust swirled in the sunlight, carrying the weight of what had been done. Boyd's men, leaderless, looked to one another. Slowly, one by one, they turned their horses and rode off, leaving the body where it lay. Evelyn's breath came in ragged gasps. She looked at Caleb, her eyes wide with the enormity of it all. He holstered his gun slowly, his face unreadable. The townsfolk emerged from hiding, their stares shifting between Boyd's body and Evelyn's trembling form. For the first time, some of them looked at her not with contempt, but with something else, respect, perhaps, or at least the recognition of truth. The preacher, old and bent with years, stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Their chains heavier than iron. Today, some of them were broken." Evelyn swayed, and Caleb caught her arm gently. She looked up at him, tears brimming but unfallen. "You believed me," she whispered. He met her gaze, steady and sure. "I saw you. That's enough." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street. Boyd Granger's reign of fear had ended, but the scars he left would not fade overnight. Still, for the first time in years, Evelyn felt the weight on her chest ease. She was not cursed. She was not ruined. She was simply a woman who had survived, and in surviving, had found her strength. As Caleb led her away from the street, whispers followed them, softer now, uncertain, shifting like the wind. Change had begun, though slow and fragile. Evelyn tightened her grip on Caleb's arm. "What happens now?" He looked out over the plains, where the mist was burning away beneath the fading sun. "Now," he said, "we live. No chains, no lies, just the truth that follows." And though the road ahead was uncertain, for the first time, Evelyn welcomed it, because truth, however heavy, was lighter than chains.